what you're saying suggests that there's a bouncer there telling me, not really. I'm sort of stuck within a certain limited set. I mean, how much are we kind of fooling ourselves about how much we can control our own behavior?
Yeah. Well, for me, what I have found is, and that was a really great question.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Phoenix. What's your background? What brought you here? What kind of work are you doing now?
Yeah, thanks, Dallas. I go by Phoenix. I have my own coaching / hypnotherapy / mental reprogramming practice here in Denver, Colorado. I've been doing it for about 8 years now, and I help people overcome big problems by working with the subconscious or the unconscious mind. Before that, I was a civil engineer. I worked in precast concrete. Did that for 9 years. I absolutely hated every day of it. And I feel like, I've been guided on quite a journey, and I ended up doing a personal development seminar out in Boston, and I ended up quitting my job, buying a van, rescuing a dog, and going on this epic road trip across the country. And on that road trip, I ended up at the Hypnotherapy Academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it was life-changing because I didn't know how to make change in my life the way that I wanted to. I had a lot of social anxiety. I had a lot of insecurity. I had a lot of doubt, a lot of fear. And this was like a mystery school where it gave me all these answers to things that is not common knowledge. So it was quite life-changing. And then after that, I ended up moving to Denver and starting my practice. So that's kind of the general summary of what I do and where I came from. Yeah.
And how long has it been now that you've been practicing hypnotherapy / many other things?
Yeah, since 2018. Yeah.
Okay, so it's been 7 years now that you've been practicing this. So you've been around the block a few times then.
I have been, yeah. I've been doing this for quite a while now. I feel like I've put in my 10,000 hours. A lot of it has just been I'm a personal development junkie. And the reason I think I've been guided on this journey is because I've experienced a lot of suffering. And a lot of what I've done in my adult life is just trying to figure out how to end my own suffering, to be honest. Yeah.
Gotcha. And when you went to this hypnotherapy school, you said they gave you did you use the word secrets? What were some of the things that they turned you on to that you were not aware of that just ended up being a game changer for you?
Yeah, 100%. Great question. I will tell you that 95% of what we do is based off of subconscious or unconscious programming. So when we try to make change in our life, oftentimes we try to use willpower. And willpower is not the most effective way to make change. There might be some people have extraordinary will, like they have created a very strong skill set of will, but most people don't. And it was very eye-opening to know that 95% of what we do is based off of programming. And programming is really just automatic behavior. And that automatic behavior stems from the past. So they become patterns in our life. And a majority of those programs stem before the age of 7, before our critical thinking mind begins and our reasoning. And it's all kind of repressed, and we're not really aware of it. So I found that if you can go back to a root cause event, clear out the emotions, then the pattern disappears. That right there was life-changing.
Wow. So sort of going back to the start of the whole domino series, in a sense, where willpower, you're saying, is something where we're going around trying to push and pull, but it doesn't have a lasting impact. It doesn't have it doesn't sound like it's very sticky, maybe. We make the effort and the changes don't stick.
Yeah. It really depends on how strong the program is. So the more emotion that you feel in a past event, the stronger the programming, the more the subconscious mind is trying to protect you from re-experiencing it. So there's more emotion. So the difference between a fear and a phobia is how much emotion you felt in that first event or any of the series of events that came after that. So I'll give you a great example. So when you're a kid, the more people, the more authority figures, the more peers that are present when something like traumatic happens or a highly emotional event happens, the greater the emotions you experience as a child, hence, the stronger the program. And I'll give you a specific example, which will really paint the picture. I developed a big fear of public speaking, and I would freeze. I couldn't speak. There would be so much anxiety for days to come. And it just felt like everything inside of me was just trying to stop me from doing it. And there was nothing I could do. I even did community theater for 5 years, and I went up and performed and did 24 shows. And that the anxiety never went away. And when I was at the Hypnosis Academy and I did a regression back, it brought me back to when I was in first grade. I was on stage with my class. It was Grandparents' Day, so the gym was filled with teachers, students, grandparents, parents, and we were singing Be Our Guest from Beauty and the Beast. And I thought the chorus was next, but the song was over. And I was the only one singing at the top of his lungs. And then everybody started laughing, but I couldn't process. I thought I had ruined the entire day. I was filled with embarrassment. So I was flooded with intense emotion because of the magnitude of how many people were there. And that's what created the phobia. So, yeah.
So you were left out on an edge, and that an auditorium full of audience members was laughing at you, and with the kids on stage also kind of, wow. So that exposure, that intense emotion. And so then were you aware of this memory of impacting you for your life, or did it only resurface later when you tried to get out on stage again for speaking and performing?
So the memory was completely blocked out until I did the hypnosis session. So I don't even remember the last time I had thought about that. So it was probably elementary school, and that's very common. Most people don't have a lot of memories before the age of 7. And, that's what makes it so difficult to find these things. And that's where going into a trance state, going into hypnosis, you can find the things that are hidden from you.
Gotcha. So, okay. So just to clarify a little bit, when people hear hypnosis, I'm used to the image of like a guy with a watch on a chain, dangling it in front of you, telling you you're getting very sleepy. Mm-hmm. And then, I don't know, they tell you to quack like a duck on stage or something like that. Like this is like the movie impression that I have. Can you give us a more accurate picture of what the hypnosis that you're talking about looks like?
Sure. I'll start off by saying that Hollywood and TV shows do a very bad depiction of hypnosis, although some of the tools that they do for inductions are accurate. But like the movie Get Out, like people think they're going to lose control and mind control, and that person became like a slave or a zombie or stuff like that. Mm. I do it in a therapeutic setting. I get people comfortable in like a reclining chair, and then I just kind of guide them into a relaxed state of mind and being. They're fully aware of everything that's going on. It's just that their conscious mind kind of gets out of the way, and it just opens the doorway to their subconscious. And from there, I just kind of give them instructions and, guide them in many different ways to find, what potentially could be blocking them from the thing that they want in life. Yeah.
Gotcha. So how conscious in a traditional normal sense are people when they're going through one of these hypnosis trance states?
Yeah. Majority of people are completely aware of everything that happens. There's like maybe 1 out of 15 that go into a very deep somnambulistic state in which I almost have to like call them back out of it because they're just so deep. But like no work can be done there. Like they're just kind of like just in a deep trance. And then I kind of have to bring them back. The only way the work can happen is if they know what's going on, right? So it's a conscious, unconscious integration. The important thing to know, like why trance is so important, why being in a hypnotic state is important, is because if you're in an awake state, there is like a gateway between the conscious and unconscious, and you can't access the subconscious easily. If anything, it's like a bouncer at a bar. And, when you're getting information, the bouncer is like checking to see if it matches your belief systems already. So like in an awake state, you're just like, you're just making sure everything you already believe is already true. versus when you're in a trance state, that gate or the bouncer is not there anymore. The gate's open, and then you can easily get in there and make change. In fact, I believe that all change happens in the unconscious mind, and that by getting it, you almost have to be in a trance state to be able to make those changes.
So what are we doing then when we're conscious, normal? Are we just simply playing out, in a sense, involuntarily? I mean, how much does, I guess you could say, free will? I know you're talking about willpower earlier, but how much does free will actually come into play when you're in just a normal conscious state? How much can we actually, because I would think, well, I can choose to do this or that, but what you're saying suggests that there's a bouncer there telling me, not really. I'm sort of stuck within a certain limited set. I mean, how much are we kind of fooling ourselves about how much we can control our own behavior?
Yeah. Well, for me, what I have found is, and that was a really great question. What I found is that we can, it's like a spectrum. So like we can choose to be more conscious, or we can choose to be more unconscious. So like we go into trance states all the time. When you're driving, you go into a trance state. Sometimes you miss an exit and you're like, whoa, how did I completely miss the exit? Or you could be doing something in your house, and then all of a sudden you end up in like the living room and you're like, why did I come into the living room? Right? So we can choose to be more conscious or be more unconscious. And what I found on my journey is that I had continued to make a lot of mistakes, and I kept slipping more and more into an unconscious state. I didn't want to be the captain of my own vessel. I didn't want to make choices. I didn't want to be responsible for my life. And then ultimately you go into a very automatic state, and that's like pure survival. So it really is understanding that you get to choose to be conscious, and at any moment of time, no matter what's happening emotionally, you can make a choice to do something else. And that we all have free will. But what I found is that because we don't know how our minds work, that a lot of people go after the things they want in life, or they make mistakes and they feel emotional pain, and then they slip more and more into this unconscious automatic state, and they don't become like the creators of their own reality. They don't become the captains of their own ship. Wow. So yeah, that's how I would answer that.
So you're really limited then in your capacity to unleash your full creative potential then at that point. You're really hamstrung in a way to live in the conscious world the way that you'd like to. So can you give us a larger context? I mean, is this it? You said hypnotherapy, but I believe you mentioned in the past, though, that you have a larger process that you go through when you're working with your clients. It's not just hypnotherapy sessions that somebody signs up for an hour and does it. There's more structure behind it. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I'll just say that in the past 8 years, I've probably invested $100,000 in my own personal development journey. And a lot of those were trainings to learn modalities and skill sets to help other people, but primarily myself to start with. Mm-hmm. So I'm trained in Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP. I'm a master trainer of NLP. I'm also not a master trainer. I'm a master practitioner of NLP and a trainer of NLP. Mm-hmm. And NLP is like a whole bunch of tools that help you understand behavior and what drives behavior in programming. It's like cognitive behavioral therapy. NLP is kind of very similar, but I feel like NLP is more powerful than CBT. So I use a variety of different tools. And I kind of take everybody through the same process of about 15 hours of total work. It usually takes about a month of time. And in that first session, I do like a detailed personal history, and I use NLP and language patterns to find what's at the root cause of a problem. Because the surface level problem is never the actual problem, right? The behavior will not tell you what's at the core of the problem. And the core of the problem is some emotion and limiting belief that's running in the background, because we are just computers and we operate based off of that computer code, which is language. And when you tell yourself, I'm not good enough, or I'm not enough, or I'm not worthy of love, or I'm broken, that becomes your reality, and that becomes the pattern. And then from there, I teach people how their minds work. And then we start doing the change work with trance. So we integrate parts, because everybody has like multiple personalities, and we have to integrate those parts so that people come back into wholeness. Parts will sabotage ourselves.
I'm going to jump in here. Parts. What do you mean by parts? Parts
Yeah.
of what?
So we'll call them parts of the psyche, parts of the ego. So in stressful moments, when we don't feel like we have the resources to handle a situation, our mind will create a part that will have a specific function and will step in to try to protect us, right? And oftentimes these parts are trying to talk us out of things. It's like, oh, I want to go after this goal, but then a part will be like, no, you can't, you shouldn't, you're not good enough, or whatever. And even though it sounds like a monster, like why am I beating myself up or criticizing myself or telling me that I can't do something, that part is really just trying to protect you from any disappointment or failure or pain in the future. So parts serve a purpose, but the challenge with parts is that they're really supposed to help us when we're young kids, but then the parts still exist as adults. So, there's a variety of different parts works, like internal family systems where you talk to the parts. Like that's something that's very common. A lot of therapists will do parts work, but there's a process where you can integrate the parts, and the parts can get integrated, and you can integrate all the parts in one integration. And there's a great TV show that was like half a season in the 90s. It was called Herman's Head, and this guy would go to this space, and it would be this apartment where there's 4 other people living there, and he'd have conversations with them. Well, that's what we're doing. We're having conversations with parts of ourselves, thinking that it's us, but it's just something that's severed from the psyche that's really just in survival mode and trying to protect us. And it's so necessary to integrate the parts so that we can move forward in life and achieve our goals. Like the analogy of this is your vessel. Think of it as a ship out at sea. If your crew members aren't working towards the captain's orders, then the ship can't get to the destination. So that's why you need the crew members working in order, and that's what parts integration does.
Gotcha. And so at the final result of a parts integration, you said they come together. So is it like a jigsaw puzzle where you have one picture, but they still have the pieces? Or do the parts actually kind of dissolve their barriers and distinctions, and they really sort of form back into, well, I guess reform into one cohesive whole? Which one is it? Because I believe with the I forgot what it's called, but you mentioned it, the family parts. It seems to me that those are voices. This is the little child inside of me. This is the angry brother. Things like that. From my experience with it, they seem to persist. It's sort of you're living with this set of characters inside of you. I know I don't mean for that to sound pejorative to the system, but to me, that's what they sound like. There's sort of like this cast going on inside you, and it seems like you simply sort of get used to these various sides of you. With the parts integration that you're doing, do the parts remain distinct from each other, or is there sort of a dissolving and coming back together into one identity, a couple of larger identities? How is it more malleable in a way?
Yeah, I mean, excellent question. I truly believe that the parts can dissolve back into the whole, and then the chatter goes away. So for me, everything on my healing journey is integrating more, and what happens is the mind gets quieter and quieter, and you're more present in the moment. So with internal family systems, you can have conversation with parts for years. But I learned that you can actually integrate parts, and there's a variety of different ways to integrate those parts. And I'm saying that one integration for a client doesn't happen to integrate all the parts, happens very rarely. I have to do multiple integrations. And sometimes, there's protector parts, there's exile parts. I've had to do a lot of integrations over the years because more seem to surface, and having the tools is really great for that. But around a specific problem, I can work with someone, I can find the parts impacting it. And then the parts use emotions to hold us back. So a part will use anxiety or fear or sadness or shame or guilt to try to prevent us from moving forward in life. So just to summarize, you can integrate those parts so that they don't show up anymore, and they're working part of a whole unit, and it's just much calmer, much more peaceful, and you can just move more effortlessly through life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to share more of your personal backstory that led up to this? You've shared with me a little bit, about that you were coming from some places with some pretty big struggles, and and that you were in a completely different place now. Would you be willing to share some of the struggles you've been through personally?
Yeah, 100%. And I know you're a relationship coach, so I'll say that the defining moment in my life was when I hit 29. I was in a relationship for 6 years and I completely lost myself in the relationship. And halfway during that relationship, I was resentful and angry at my partner and ended up going out with my friends. I got drunk and I ended up cheating on her. And the next day I was filled with guilt. And that was the moment where I completely switched to unconscious. Like, I didn't want to make any more decisions. I did not like myself. I learned to hate myself, and I couldn't believe I had done that. And that's where I was like, I'm just going to let her make all the decisions in the relationship. And as long as she's happy, that's okay. And then I had an alcohol problem and I just kept slipping deeper and deeper into alcoholism. And then 5 years into the relationship, she had come home one day and she had asked me, my family wants to know why you haven't proposed, right? And they were just worried and concerned about her. And I was in such a dark place that had not even crossed my mind. I was literally just barely surviving life. That's what it felt like. And in that moment, I had lied. But the way that I would lie was I never wanted to tell people bad news. So I would tell them what I thought they wanted to hear. So I had developed a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms. And in that year, that following year, I had spiraled back and forth into, I can marry her, I don't want to marry her. And then I completely lost my mind. That's what I'm telling you. When you spiral, and that's a parts conflict. When you have an internal conflict, that's an indication of parts. So there's parts of me that were going back and forth, spiraling me out. And I just completely got more and more confused and I just didn't know what to do. And then I had this moment of clarity, I call it. And I was like, yeah, I can marry her and this can work out. And then I ended up proposing and it all happened very fast. And we were engaged. And then I was the one that wanted to do a fast track wedding and do it that same year, which was like 8 months away, which a lot had to happen. So within a matter of weeks, the hall was booked, the band was booked, everything, the church, the wedding dress was bought. And that's when panic started setting in. I started having panic attacks. I couldn't sleep at night. And then I had to put a halt to the wedding plans. And then a month later, I ended the relationship. But that is when I spiraled into rock bottom. I was so depressed. I felt so terrible about putting her through this situation and her family. And every thought brought physical pain in my body. And that's where I had felt like I was dying. I felt like my time was about to come to an end. And I didn't know what to do. And I had nothing in my future to look forward to. So I was in this proverbial hell, filled with anxiety, depression, crazy thoughts all the time.
And were you still drinking at this point? Was the alcohol also involved?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And then I just started searching because I felt desperate. And then the strangest thing saved my life. I reached out to my buddy Sean, and him and his family would go see this well-known psychic. And I was like, I'm desperate. I don't believe in this. I just need something. And those 30 minutes changed my life, And he made me a believer in those 30 minutes. And then he told me that I would meet my soulmate. And that possibility, that thing in the future, the possibility of love in my future actually created a catalyst. And I decided to make different choices. And I started to better myself. And that's when I started to wake back up. And it's been a long process and a long healing process because, the thing that confused me the most, I hit bottom at 29, But almost 10 years before, I graduated like my high school class, best all around, most likely to succeed, most athletic. So I'd stumbled on success and I had all this confidence. And then all of a sudden I hit bottom and I want to die, right? Like it just didn't make any sense. So fast forward, I ended up doing things to improve my life. And I found a hypnotist to quit smoking. And then a couple of years later, when I was ready to quit drinking, right before the age of 31, I saw that same hypnotist and I quit drinking. So that was the beginning of getting a deeper understanding of hypnosis. And then I did that seminar at 35 in Boston called the Landmark Forum. And then here, I've just been doing so many different things. When it comes to healing, I've done 33 nights of ayahuasca. I've done.
Whoa, hang on. 33 nights. Is that like 33 different ayahuasca sessions that you've done?
Yeah. Some of them are like 1 night ceremonies, 2 nights, 3 nights. I went to Colombia and I traveled the southern region of Colombia and I went to different shamans. Okay. And yeah, and a lot of it took courage.
I know people. I've never been on an ayahuasca journey, but I've met people that have done 1, maybe 2, but 33. Yeah. Was there? Let me just ask: what compelled you? What was the need that you were feeling inside that took you to do it that many times?
I've had some miraculous moments on that plant medicine. The very first time I took it, I got physical healing. So I felt this feminine energy presence come in my body and I felt my body being healed. And I had a neck injury from weightlifting and I had, my neck was completely healed after that. So when you have experiences like that, it really is like, it's like, is this a magic potion to the game of life? Yeah. Like in The Legend of Zelda or any video game, like that's what it felt like. But I've had a lot of harrowing journeys and I've died on that medicine or thought I've died going into my deepest and darkest fears. But what really was the smoking gun to how I ended up hitting bottom was like my 5th ayahuasca ceremony. It opened me up to a repressed memory of a very deep trauma. And that was the missing puzzle piece to all of it. And most of my ayahuasca ceremonies was just clearing out trauma. And I'll explain to you a little bit more of how I see the healing process. So it opened the door to sexual trauma at a very young age, around like 3 years old. Mm-hmm. And I made decisions in that event. And one of the things that my abuser said to me was like, if I tell anyone, he's going to hurt my sister. So that's when I made a decision that it wasn't safe to share what was going on inside of me. So what happened is I started to internalize everything. I started to suppress all my emotions. So from the age of 3, I just kept stacking more and more emotions and not resolving them. Because if you resolve emotions, or if your parents help you resolve emotions, if you're in a negative state, the program doesn't get created, the program gets dissolved. But for me, I just kept stacking more and more programs. So, I've had so many core wounds, so many core limiting beliefs, and I've just had to, it's just taking a long time to unpack all of those. And that's why I had used ayahuasca so much. And the other tools of NLP and timeline therapy and parts integration is that from a very young age, I was trying to escape life. And in that process, I developed a lot of limiting programming.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So you just mentioned, so the ayahuasca was sort of the plant medicine, Legend of Zelda potion that sort of helps speed up the process. But then you mentioned, I believe, 3 other things that you mentioned: NLP, timeline therapy, and parts. So we went over parts. Mm-hmm. You touched briefly on NLP, but what is timeline therapy?
Yeah. Timeline therapy is a tool that was created by an NLP trainer. So it's actually very similar to a hypnosis technique called regression hypnosis. So it's really about finding the very first event that a program happens, right? And timeline therapy is so powerful because you don't have to go into a deep trance. You just need to go into a mild trance. And your unconscious mind can guide you to the very first event where a limiting belief, a negative emotion, a limiting decision first began. And when you clear out the emotions and you install new computer code, the program changes, and every event, the pattern itself, everything connected to it gets released as well. So like people can clear out a whole bunch of stuff from their past. Like after I integrate parts, then that's the next step of the process where you clear out the major negative emotions. So you clear out all the anger emotions, all the sadness emotions and hurt, all the fear, all the guilt, all the shame. And when you integrate parts and you let go of those negative emotions, people have a profound shift in their life because you think you have to go to all these little things, but no, like if you group all the anger emotions together and release them in one go, I can help someone clear all their negative emotions in like an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Wow, that's amazing. Is that because the various places and situations in life that we experience the anger or the frustration, that they're really not, hundreds of different situations. They're really hundreds of different ways that we're expressing or playing out one central source of the anger? Is that sort of what it comes down to?
Yeah, a good way to think about it is that all different anger emotions, right? And there's really only 5 major negative emotions from the way I see it. So like anger, hatred, resentment, aggression, scorn, wrath, loathing, like they're just different forms of the same emotion. And if you really think about it, those are all the fight emotions. So you're trying to push people away or do something so that you don't get hurt, right? So what I find is that each one of these major negative emotions have the same learnings that can clear out all of those similarities in emotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it usually doesn't take a lot of learnings to let go of these things. So yeah.
How how exhausting, how difficult is it to go through one of these sessions and have, all the anger, for example, brought together and then released? I mean, are you on the floor crying and shaking, in the fetal position? I mean, like how, because if we're releasing, stuff that happened way back in childhood, and then there's this whole domino effect, that plays out, that releases it. I mean, how exhausting of a day is that for the person going through it?
It really varies. Depends on the person. For some people, they can be pretty tired afterwards, but others, it's just like very easy, and they're just. I think the important thing is like when people realize that they don't need their negative emotions to protect themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people it just clicks. And other people, it's like pulling teeth a little bit. It's like, oh, they're holding on to the emotions, or they don't know how to step in. But I find that it depends where you are on that spectrum of conscious and unconscious. So if you're more in that unconscious survival mode, it takes more work to get people to let go, because it really is about taking responsibility. And for me, the biggest challenge is that I had avoided so much responsibility in my life that I became so afraid of my negative emotions. And that's really how it goes hand in hand. The more you don't want to feel pain, the more you don't want to be responsible for things. So that's what really came down to. It comes down to responsibility. And I think that's the important thing, is like people that are already living a very fairly responsible life, it's much easier to let go of these things. But if you're in complete survival mode, this process probably will take more than 15 hours.
It'll rough you up a bit in the process of shifting it around. So you mentioned there's somebody that believes they need their anger, that they need some of these hostile emotions, that they're keeping them safe and all of that. So let's say you go through the process and somebody can let go of them. What replaces that feeling? What, if I thought I needed my anger in order to keep me safe, to keep people at a distance, and then we've, like you said, updated the code and we've changed the programming, what's in place of it then? Is it blank slate? Is it what is somebody using in place of that, that thing that kept them safe?
That's so great. I mean, you keep asking the best questions. It really is a great question, because what we think is that those negative emotions are really protecting us, but they're protecting us in a very unhealthy way because they're the fight, flight, freeze emotions, right? And then the others are the self-loathing and pride emotions. When you're in a fight, flight, freeze response, you're not in your best thinking mind, right? Like nutrients in the blood goes to the muscles and the lungs and the heart, and they move away from the brain. So in fact, it's not the best way to handle a situation. So they actually don't do a very good job of protecting you. They actually create more karma. I'll call it karma, but more programming and more emotions, because if you use that anger and you hurt someone, then you're actually hurting yourself, because what goes around comes around. What you give, you receive. So those emotions actually impact you on a greater level, right? And the more guilt and shame you build up, from my experience, that's where the deeper addictions come in, right? Alcoholism, substances, food, that kind of stuff. It's really connected to guilt and shame. So on the flip side, we live in a dualistic world, right? There's opposites to everything. So what's the opposite of negative emotions? Positive, right? And that's the positive states. So the thing is we have resources. They're internal resources, and everybody has them, and we're here to develop and grow. Just like the video game analogy, we're here to build those resources. And those resources are very simple. It's like strength, power, trust, surrender, faith, love, compassion, forgiveness. And the more that we use those resources, then we can handle situations, right? So if you handle situations in a very powerful, resourceful state, you are going to be able to protect yourself, right? So
you're replacing anger and hostility with a sense of genuine power, a sense of genuine love, a sense of genuine acceptance. Those are actually the experience. Those are the experiences that replace the feeling of anger and hostility.
Correct.
Wow, that's like a 180. I mean, it sounds like it's not just like removing the problem. It's actually taking you to the place that we'd all like to be, all of the time.
Yeah. And the thing that most people don't realize is, like I said, in stressful moments when we're kids, we don't know we have those resources. Safety is a big one. Safety is not an external thing, right?
I would actually even say we don't have them when we're kids, because we're too little, we're too vulnerable. We don't have strength and power. We don't have autonomy. We are dependent still on our parents, where we don't have the capacity yet to do that. We're way too vulnerable, I think, to actually develop that sense of, oh, well, I can love because I've provided for myself and I have surplus to go around. Like, as you're a kid, you don't. If your parents stop hunting and, providing shelter for you and whatever, like, you're dead. You're dead, in the water or out on the field, somewhere you're dead. I don't think when we're children, we actually have the capacity yet to have some of that positive, the positive programming in place, where we're simply too vulnerable. Do you agree with that, or do you?
I agree with part of it, right? Like, we are so dependent on our family, but that's why all those emotions are around not getting kicked out of your tribe, and your parents are the most important tribe members, right?
Yeah.
So, we had talked about that before. So we keep ourselves safe with those emotions, and we create defense mechanisms so that we're accepted. It all comes to acceptance. That's what the ego and the emotions are trying to do, is trying to create more and more acceptance. The part that I will say is that we do have those resources, the internal resources. We just, as kids, we don't know we have them, and we don't know how to find them. And that's where, when you have very healthy communicative parents, they can help you through those situations. So when you are experiencing a negative emotion, a parent can teach you that you're safe. The parent can teach you confidence and belief in yourself. And that's the challenge. But most of us don't have that. And in fact, we're living just in cycles of generational trauma, where a lot of adults that are out in the world, they respond reactionally with emotions. So they still haven't learned that they can use their internal resources instead of the negative emotions. And you can see that with the political dynamics of the world.
Right. And then they're, of course, raising their children in the way that they were raised. They haven't come to that awareness. So they're not really passing on better habits for the most part than the ones they were given. Yeah. I want to ask specifically about pornography. So that's something that a lot of the men that, pretty much all men, in American society have touched on and have dealt with one way or another. And a lot of guys struggle quite deeply with it. I'm going to assume that the NLP and the timeline therapy and the hypnotherapy that you're doing, I'm going to assume that pornography also falls into that field of things that can be worked on. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, I had shared with you before that I had a porn addiction for many years. And it was some very weird porn too, and in fact, it was porn that was connected to my earlier sexual trauma. So it was weird because I would watch it and then I would feel ashamed afterwards, So eventually what I had discovered through doing this work and every habit that I've given up is connected to emotions. So ultimately, it really comes down to the emotions from the past. And when I walk people through the process of integrating parts and letting go of negative emotions, a lot of these habits just fall off, right? Because it is driven by energetics. And, a lot of the times those cravings and those desires are trying to fill a void. And that void is really connected to those limiting beliefs and decisions and those core wounds of like not feeling lovable or not feeling worthy or not feeling enough, and that craving kind of is trying to fill a need that's not being met in some ways. Mm-hmm. So it's actually can be very simple to let go of those porn addictions and also understanding how those things hurt you and impact you. What I realized after giving up my porn addiction, and I pretty much have given up masturbation, except every once in a while, like my confidence, my motivation, like when I do masturbate, like my motivation completely drops. So like if you understand how it's hurting you so much more than helping you, I feel like there's that trade-off, and most people need to go through that process of realizing, oh, I did not know how much this was impacting me in a negative way. And that really helps people to choose to give it up. But giving up habits is very easy. You can quit by making one decision. Yeah.
Quit by making one decision. I mean, that sounds like what people would love to do that have bad habits or addiction. So tell us, in a little bit of time that we have left, tell us how one decision can be the turning point for giving up bad habits.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you from my personal experience, it took me a year to finally come to the place to quit drinking. And in that process, I was doing thought experiments and learning about the impacts of alcohol and how poisonous it is. And if I continue doing this, where would I be at 35 and 40 and 45 and 50?
Now, I'm not sure we've clarified this, but we're talking about social drinking here, or are we talking about like alcoholism?
Yeah, I would say it's alcoholism. So, I mean, I wouldn't drink during the day. It'd be like I'd get home and probably 4 to 5 times a week, I would get blackout drunk. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're talking heavy drinking here. Okay.
Heavy drinking. Yeah. And then it was really hard because I had developed this strong habit. I had built this emotional connection to it. I felt like it was my friend. And I had severe shame and social anxiety. So I didn't know how to survive life without it, especially in social situations, because I would completely clam up and freeze up and feel so uncomfortable around other people. So I didn't know how I could live without it. But eventually, and on top of that, I had dropped out of college and I went to rehab because I had a drinking problem in college, and I relapsed. And I knew that I had to do something different. And that's where I was like, I want to quit drinking for the rest of my life. I just didn't know how to make that decision. And so I kind of went through that process of cost versus gain. And eventually, one thing that really tipped it over the edge is somebody posted on Reddit, like, who's the last person you'd want to see on your deathbed? And someone posted, I would hate to see the version of myself that met its potential. And that right there was just like, yeah, exactly.
I mean,
And
that's probably the most intimidating person we could ever meet, is the version of us at any stage of our life that's
yeah,
like, oh, here's Dallas, at age 45, who
yeah,
did all the things he could have been doing, all along the way. Like, nobody ever wants to meet that person.
yeah.
Wow. And so what did that shift inside of you? What did that wake up?
So it created a bigger fear,
Oh, great.
uh,
Yeah.
a bigger fear of going through my entire life and regretting my entire life. That fear was bigger than the fear of social anxiety, the fear of emotional pain. And when I was ready, I was 100% committed to quitting drinking for the rest of my life. And that was the decision I made. And then I did one hypnosis session, which helped reprogram the mind and made that decision easier. And I never have touched a drink since,
So let me see if I got this right. So when you imagined looking at yourself, you experienced a deeper, higher degree of fear than all of the situations where you imagined interacting with other people, social anxiety and things like that. So it was actually seeing yourself that was actually the catalyst, that actually had the most leverage. It wasn't really the external factors. It was, and I'm going to guess that's also the one place that maybe you didn't look the most, up until that point. That was what you needed to actually make the life-changing choice.
Yeah, because most people who are dealing with these habits, they're not connected to the consequences. Like, that's why everybody who smokes cigarettes and all the carcinogens, they're not thinking about the cancer that's going to happen 20 to 30 years later, even though they know about it. And I know a lot of hypnotists that go through this process of in trance, seeing the version of themselves, if they continue smoking down this timeline, what their life's going to be. Oh, you're not going to be at your children's wedding, right? How about that? Or you're not going to see your grandchildren get born. And that often is enough catalyst is like, people who have kids, they'll quit smoking cold turkey like that, because there's something more important. There's something more important in all of it.
Yeah, we become aware. We see the trade-offs we're making on our decisions in a whole new light and a whole new perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, thank you very much, Phoenix, for coming on. If people want to know more about what you're doing and potentially work with you, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, very simply, you can just search on Google The Mind Guy in Denver. My website is themindguy.net, and you can set up a free consultation, and we can chat for like 15 minutes and see if it's a good fit to work together. So that'd be the simplest way. And thank you for allowing me to share that.
Absolutely. And you've thrown out a lot of ideas that are non-conventional, I'd say, different approaches to take. And I imagine there are a lot of guys that are listening and watching this episode thinking, I don't know about this. This sounds a little out there. This sounds a little crazy. What would you say to the guys that are doubting the validity of what you do and what you've experienced?
I think for me is just my story, and like, I think the greatest challenge is that most people don't realize how much I've suffered in my life. And I think especially men suffer because of one decision of like, it's not okay to feel or express emotions. So men are notorious suppressors, and that is the source for me of all problems. So if someone is doing that consistently, then that's where a lot of their programming, and that's what's getting in the way. So, I mean, all I can do is just share authentically and just share what I've overcome. And it might resonate with some people, it might not. But for me, the only reason I did 33 nights of ayahuasca was out of desperation. So a lot of people that find me have been stuck in these patterns or habits for decades, not really knowing how to change. And a lot of them have tried a lot of things, but just spinning their wheels, just not knowing. And I feel like I made it my mission to find a way. And I just continued finding the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And now I can help people go through this process in a much shorter period of time than I had to do for myself.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Thank you for being so vulnerable with us, telling us about the story and everything you've been on. And again, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dallas. Appreciate it.
Thanks. All right, bye, Phoenix.